Ayubowan. So in this lesson today, we are going to have a look at the IELTS speaking component, right? Now I know in the introductory video, I gave you an overview, but as I promised in this one, we are going to go more in detail as to what the marking criteria is, and then we're going to have a look at the band descriptors, and we're going to have a look at the speaking test more in detail. Right, so having a look at the structure of the exam, even if you do computer-based, even if you do paper-based, you will have to face an examiner in a room, right? So your speaking test will always be face-to-face with a Cambridge qualified examiner. And the test will be recorded to verify the grade that the examiner gives you in case you want your test to be remarked. Then it's going to be easy for them to remark it because they're always going to record your speaking test. There are 3 parts for the speaking test: part 1, part 2, and part 3. You will be provided with a pen and paper. Usually we like to provide them with a pencil, right? So most of the time you'll be getting a pencil and a paper for part 2. Now, I know when you are doing reading and writing, general students have a separate paper as well as the academic students then have a separate paper. However, when it comes to your listening, as I told you, and speaking, right, you will have one test for all candidates. Even if you're doing academic, even if you're doing general, the test will be the same. There's no difference, right? And as I told you, even if you're doing paper-based, even if you're doing computer-based, you will still have to face an examiner face-to-face in a room, and they will conduct the speaking test. Now, usually the speaking test will run from about 11 to 14 minutes. But between each candidate, there is a 20-minute gap. So example, if I go at 9, you will go at 9:20, the next candidate 9:40, and the next one 10 o'clock, okay? So it's for the examiner to wrap up and start and get ready and all of that. There's an extra 6 minutes, okay? So here, the time frame for the test is 11 to 14 minutes. It will not be less than that. It will not be more than that. As long as you speak, the test will run smoothly. The examiner strictly controls the time, okay? So the examiner will make sure that he or she will watch the time and then move from section 1 to section 2 and then from section 2 to section 3, and they will control the length of your answer. So sometimes they will say thank you and then move on into the next question, okay? So there are 2 things that the examiner controls: the time and the length. The next one, the style. How should you give your answers? Should it be very formal? Should it be really informal? Well, I believe it should be neutral, not too formal, let's put a slash here, and not too informal, okay? So it's better if you have a neutral style when you're speaking, okay? Now, what does the test actually have? So you have an ID check and greeting. So they're going to check your ID and the examiner will tell his or her examiner ID number, and there's an ID check. And then there's a greeting. And then we start with part 1. You answer a few short questions based on 3 different topics. Altogether, you will have 12 questions. So 3 topics, that means under each topic you will have 4 questions and they will ask you 12 questions. Now, these topics could be very general topics like about work, study, if you're studying, your hometown, reading, cycling, water, about parks, about dreams, about traveling, about computers, about flowers, about objects, anything which is a very general topic. Okay, they're not difficult questions, they're quite easy questions. You don't need to give a long answer because the time frame is about 4 to 5 minutes. So you can give simple answers like an example. Let's take, do you think women like to go shopping than men? Okay, so, well, do you think that women like to go shopping than men? So you can say, yes, I do because of this reason. Or you can say, no, I don't think so, and give a reason. Okay, so it doesn't have to be too lengthy, just your answer about it and then, or your opinion about it, how you feel about it, and then just one reason as to why you are saying so. So part 1 will run from about 4 to 5 minutes. Next, we have part 2. Now, part 2 is a topic card. That means they give you a specific question. Okay, they give you a topic, something related about your past or present life. Okay, and they will give you some bullet points to guide you as to what you need to talk about, and then they will give you 1 minute to prepare and a paper and a pencil to jot down some points. When 1 minute is up, your examiner will tell you to then start talking. You have to talk for about a minute or 2. Better if you can talk close upon 2 minutes. So example, they will tell you, describe a trip you went as a child. In that they will give you bullet points to tell where you went, how did you travel, and why did you enjoy it, and why you remember that trip so well, for an example. So you will have time to prepare 1 minute, and then the examiner will tell you, you can start talking, and then you would have to talk between 1 to 2 minutes. And at the end, they would give you 1 or 2 round of questions depending on how well you spoke. Okay? Next comes part 3. Part 3 is related to part 2. Now, in the example that I told you, you had to explain about a trip that you went as a child. So part 3 questions will be related about traveling, traveling partners, places you can visit, related topics. They will not give you anything like to talk about, say, something completely alienated. Okay, not about like science or museums or things like that, which are completely out of the context. Okay, so usually it would be related to the topic in part 2. And here, the number of questions that the examiner asks you depends on the length of your answers. Right? So usually we tell the students, right, part 3, you have to give an answer like a body para in your writing. So you kind of tell what you're going to talk about, you explain it, you give an example, and then you kind of round off the idea. So for part 3, you have about 4 to 5 minutes, and remember, the examiner will control the time. Right, so I hope that was very clear in terms of what the test has and how many parts are there, the time frame and the number of questions are quite clear. Next, choice of topics. Now we can't pick and choose the topics that we like to talk about, okay? The examiner will decide. Now, what happens actually is behind the scenes, that's something that you don't see, is that before you walk into the test, the examiner will decide that, okay, so we have a test booklet, and in that there are a number of tests. So the examiner will decide, okay, I'm going to give this test to these students, right? So it depends. Before you walk in, the examiner has decided which test they're going to start you off with. So say test number 7, it's got part 1, part 2, part 3. You cannot, I'll repeat it again, you cannot request to change the topic or what you have to talk about. You can't say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know, could you give me another topic? Not possible. Whatever they ask you, you have to answer. So what I tell my students is that, well, it doesn't have to be honest. As long as you're using language and grammar, that's okay. They're not here to test how well we know about general knowledge, etc. So I remember when I was a student, I did have a card for part 2, and they asked me to talk about an object that I saw in the museum. By that time, I had never been to a museum in London, so I didn't know really, okay? So I was talking about a painting that was there at home, and I made sure that I spoke about it actually like being in the British Museum. So at the end of the test, I remember the examiner smiling and saying, oh, Sandhani, that was such a good answer. And I was laughing and saying, I said, you do know that there's nothing like that in the British Museum. And she was laughing. And she said, oh, yeah. But it was a brilliant answer, okay? So what you need to remember is that sometimes you don't really need to be honest about it, okay? What you have to do is make sure that you answer it in terms of language and grammar, okay? So these practice tests and doing these practice tests are really, really important, okay? So when the examiner is marking the test, the examiner who asks you the questions decide your results at the end of the test. So they don't wait till you go home and they don't give you a grade next week. By the time your test is done, they will give you a mark at the end of the test. The test recording will only, remember this, will only be used if you request for a remark. If not, it will not be remarked. So if you request for a remark, a senior examiner will later listen to the recording and decide if your score should be changed or not. Okay, so they will decide about your score at the end. Alright, so moving on, how are band scores awarded for speaking, right? Now you have 4 marking criterias. We have a look at fluency and cohesion, that is the length and the flow of your answer. Vocabulary, okay, how well you use a variety of words to explain the topic, and also your paraphrasing techniques. Remember when I taught you paraphrasing, I said it's really important for you in all your skills. Not just writing, but in speaking, when you listen, when you also read, it's very important, okay? Next, grammar. So again, how well you can handle tenses and the sentence structures. Last but not least, you've got pronunciation, and that is how you pronounce, articulate the words correctly, and do you actually pronounce the words properly with the individual sounds, right? Maintaining intonation, okay? That means the variation in your voice. Api Sinhalen kiwat hande us pahat bave, right? So you don't want to say, today I'd like to talk about this. How are you today? Well, I'd like to talk about a trip I made as a child, and this happened in 1997. I was about 10 years old. I actually went on a trip to Kalpitia, and there I saw. That's not how you're going to speak. Okay, so you would like to, have variations. I'd like to talk about a trip that I made as a child. Actually, I went to Kalpitia when I was about 10 years old, and this was in 1997. You've got the variation in your voice, and that is important when you say intonation. But if you can see here, there is an equal percentage for the 4 marking criterias. 25% for fluency and cohesion, 25% for vocabulary, 25% for grammar, and 25% for pronunciation. Right, so moving on, here is the band descriptors public version. It's just like the one that I showed you for writing, but that was for writing, and this is for speaking. Now, if you can see, 0 means basically you do not attend, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I haven't seen students who have got below 4.0, right? 4.0 is the lowest that I have seen. There may be students who get 3 and 2, but personally I haven't seen anyone with that score, okay? So this is the marking criteria we're looking at. Let's have a look at each band individually. Right, so before I start explaining, I'd like you to pause the video for each band descriptor when I put it and then go through it before I explain, so that when I explain, it makes more sense. So off you go, take about 2 minutes to read through this. Alright, so I hope you would have gone through the 4 marking criterias. Now, if you take a band 9, that means basically you speak really well. You speak fluently. You rarely self-repeat or self-correct, okay? You don't have any hesitation like to find, words or for fluency, okay? You will speak appropriately using cohesive features to link your ideas, and you will develop topics fully and appropriately. You will talk to the topic with lots of nice words, and you won't go, yeah, you know what I mean, yeah, that one, okay? So don't do that, okay? Don't drag and don't pause. Don't go back and repeat. When I say don't pause, you can pause. I mean, after you give an answer, you can pause as usual. But don't drag it and don't go and self-correct and self-repeat and just, give long pauses without answers. That's what I mean, okay? Lexical resource obviously means vocabulary. So you're good using your vocabulary. Full flexibility and precision in all topics, and you use idiomatic language naturally, okay? Next one is grammar. You use a full range of sentence structures, and apart from a few slips, that means slip by the tongue, we say, චුට්ටක් වැරදුනා එහෙම හිතලා නෙවෙයි නිකන් කියාගෙන යනකොට එකපාරට චුටි වැරදීම් එනවා. Okay? So apart from that, nothing wrong. You actually have the characteristics of a native speaker, right? Pronunciation also is same, right? You have good pronunciation features, and without making an effort, it's easy to understand. When I say pronunciation, you can get a 9. You don't have to, sound like a British or an American to get a 9, okay? It's how well you pronounce. Well, if you pronounce it properly and well enough, and it's easy to understand, and you maintain those pronunciation features, you should be able to get a 9. But I know most of you aren't looking at a 9 or an 8. Most of you are looking 7 above or 6, 6.5. So that's the range we're looking at. But I know there are some students who want to really get an 8 or above, okay? So that's why I thought I'll run through this as well. So 8 means you speak fluently with only occasional repetitions. You can see here it's rare. However, when it comes here, it's occasional repetition, right? And self-correction. Hesitation usually is about content, okay? And it's not really, problems with the language or things like that. And you develop the topic coherently and appropriately. So it's quite straightforward. Next one is lexical resource, right? Where you use a wide range of vocabulary and you use less common idiomatic vocabulary, and you can paraphrase well. Grammar as well, you use a wide range, not full range, but a wide range, and you produce majority of the sentences error-free. Pronunciation also is that you have a flexible use of the features, right? There might be occasional lapses, but it's easy to understand, and L1 might have a minimal effect on understanding the language. So if you have 8.5, it means that you have all the features of 8 and some positive features of 9. Right. Okay, so next comes 7 and 6. I'd like you to take 2 minutes and read through it. Alright, so I hope you would have gone through it. Let's have a look at 7 and 6. Now these two are very important, okay? Because 7 means that you speak at length without noticeable effort. You may have some language related hesitation, some repetition or some self-correction, but you would use a range of connectives and discourse markers. Okay, so connectives are linkers that you use to link ideas. Discourse markers are like, discourse markers would mean like I personally believe, in my perception, where you kind of use the markers, right? So lexical resource on the other hand would be vocabulary, and there you use some less common and idiomatic vocabulary. You do know collocations, right? You do use paraphrase techniques effectively. Grammar on the other hand, you have a range of complex sentence structures, right? There might be some grammatical mistakes though. Pronunciation, you show all positive features of 6 and some of 8. Not all, but some of 8. Okay? Right. When it comes to 6, of course, you're willing to speak at length, though you might have occasional repetition and some hesitation, right? You could use a range of connectives, right? Not always appropriately. So here you're using it with some flexibility. When it drops down to 6, it's not always appropriate. Here you have a wide range of vocab, and it doesn't really talk about idiomatic expressions or collocations because you might not be exhibiting it. But generally, you can paraphrase. Generally, you're okay. We say, okay. Here, you have a mix of simple and complex sentence structures, but it's not so bad. We do understand what you're writing. Rarely may have some problems in understanding. When it comes to pronunciation, you use a range of pronunciation features. You show some effective use of these features and generally can be understood throughout. Okay? You might mispronounce some words, but really it's not that bad. Okay? Right, so you've got 5, 4. I'd like you to take 2 minutes and go through it. Now, hopefully you've gone through it. So you can see when it drops from 6 to 5, again, there's a big jump, right? So what students tell me mostly, Miss, I have 5, can I get a 6 in 1 week? It's just 1 mark. It's not 1 mark. There's a big jump from one band to another band. Right? So, godak ay mata kiyana misane dashama pahaine nathna එක ලකුණයිනේ. It's not එක ලකුණෝ දශම පහ. There is a big jump if you can see in the words and the meaning of it. ලොකු jump එකක් තියෙනවා, right? So, what you have to understand is that if you have a 5 and you want a 7 or a 6, you need a certain time to improve those skills. Today you do the exam and then again next month you're going to do the exam. That's not going to help you to get a better score. Right, so usually if you're having a 5, you maintain the flow of the speech, right, and you use repetition, you use self-correction, You might overuse certain connectives or discourse markers. You might produce simple speech fluently, right? And maybe complex ones have a problem in terms of fluency. You manage to talk about familiar and unfamiliar topics. You might have an attempt, or you might attempt to paraphrase, but not so successfully. Okay, right? Here you produce sentences with the basic sentence structures. You have a limited range of complex sentences and may cause some comprehension problems. So when you say a 5, you have all positive features of 4, but not all, some positive features of 6, right? Then of course you have 4, right? And I think that is clear to understand. Then we have 3, 2, 1, 0, which I think you could read and understand. So we're not looking, anyone doesn't want this kind of score. Even a basic requirement is 4, 4.5. Okay, so if your dependent is abroad, etc., they're looking at 4, 4.5 at least. Okay. Right, okay. Now moving on. Do you need to remember to kind of expand your answers? Well, yes. To get a band 6 or above in terms of fluency, you must show the examiner that you're willing to speak at length, so you must expand. That's why I said part 1, you just say yes or no and give a reason. Part 2 is timed and you have a set of, bullet points that you need to cover. But when it comes to part 3, that's why I told you that you must try to follow a body para structure. So you have like the topic sentence, you explain, you give an example, that kind of specific structure. So you must be able to talk at length and you must show the examiner that you can speak at length. Should you give examples in your answer? Yes, please do. When you move into part 3 especially, part 2 of course is related to you, so that's okay. Part 3, yes, give examples, fully expand your answer. Please do give in examples. It's really, really good. What happens if your answer includes the answer to the next question on the examiner's list? Don't worry about that. You might forget, right? That's okay. The examiner will skip that question and move on to the next question after that. So you don't need to worry. As I told you, the examiner will control the time and the length and the structure. So you don't need to worry structure. He or she will move to the next question. Do you need to speak for 2 minutes? Well, it's not compulsory. But as I told you, we recommend you to speak for about 1.5 to 2 minutes. But if you're not really a confident speaker, even if you speak like just above 1 minute, that's fine. But we encourage you to speak close upon 2 minutes. What if you continue talking past 2 minutes? Well, remember my tip for you? The examiner will control the time and will stop you when you reach 2 minutes. Then he or she will move into the next parts of the test. Okay? Do you have to follow the prompts on the cue card? Remember I told you there are bullet points to cover. Well, do you have to follow the prompts on the cue card? It's not really compulsory, but we always recommend that you follow the prompts because it's often good, right? And well, moving on, do you have to follow the prompts in your cue card? That is in part 2. Should you do that? Well, there's nothing saying it's compulsory, but we recommend you to do that. Okay, we recommend you to follow the prompts because it usually offers you like a good structure and good score if you cover usually the prompts, right? So it's better or it's recommended that you cover these prompts. Will the examiner look at the notes that you make in part 2? Remember, I told you you have 1 minute to prepare and you can make yourself notes. Now, will the examiner look at those notes? No. The notes are for you to plan and for you to look at it while speaking. It will not be checked or assessed by the examiner. What's the difference between Part 1 and Part 3 IELTS in the speaking test? Well, Part 1, it's usually short answer questions. That's why I say tell yes or no or give your opinion and give a reason. But when it comes to Part 3, it will be more complex issues about like the word and more broad aspects of discussion, and you would have to explain more by giving examples, etc. Okay, so here it's usually related to your life. Oops, the T is missing, so let me just dot it down there. Okay, topics relating to your life. But when it actually comes to Part 3, it's actually more broader and it's related to probably the world or broader topics. And the most important thing is that the answers should be detailed. Right. What can you do if you do not understand a question? Well, you can, if it's for Part 1, you can ask the examiner to repeat the question. However, the examiner cannot explain it to you. There's a set way that an examiner needs to, behave. So they can only tell what is scripted in their booklet. So the examiner can repeat the question, but they cannot explain it to you. Part 2, you can't ask the examiner to change the topic because you don't understand it. Whatever the topic he or she gives you, you have to talk about it. For Part 3, if you don't understand, well, you could ask the examiner again and say, I'm sorry, could you explain that again? So they will kind of rephrase it and ask you the same question in a different way. Okay? Right. Will you get a lower score if you ask the examiner to repeat the question? Not really, but if you keep on doing it like over more than 2 or 3 times, that means you clearly don't understand. So then it's going to affect your score. I mean, once if you just say, oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again? It's not a big thing. But if you keep on doing it more than 2 or 3 times, then that becomes a repetitive problem. So it is a problem. That means you don't understand the language. Okay? What if you do not have any ideas? Well, you can really bring out your honest view and say, to be honest, I've never really thought about it before, but maybe there could be things like this and this and this, but I'm really not sure, right? As I told you, you don't have to be honest. You can tell the examiner, well, that's not really that's not really my topic or area that I know about, but this is what I feel and these are some of the probable answers. So you could say that, but don't wait without answering it because that's going to give you a low score. Okay? Do you need an accent when you speak? No, you don't. Your normal way of speaking is fine. The examiner just needs to hear you clearly, nicely and loudly. You don't have to have an accent, right? All you have to do is make sure that the examiner can understand you. If not, it will give you a low score, right? Okay. Why does the examiner interrupt your answer? So, if the examiner is satisfied with your answer and he or she wants to move to another part, they might quickly move to another question. Okay? If you exceed the time limit, then the examiner might move on to the next question and interrupt you. If your answer has gone off topic, then the examiner would want to start a new question. So these are the instances when an examiner would actually interrupt you while you're speaking. If not, they quietly listen to what you're talking about. Can you ask the examiner for his or her opinion? No, the exam is to test your language skills. You can't ask them, Did I do the test well? Will I get a 7? Will I get a 6.5? You can't ask that. Okay. Examiners are friendly, but you can't get their opinion about it, about your score. Okay. So, oh, and one more thing. I forgot to tell you, you might be thinking about the one that I was telling you as a student. Okay. So that was when I was practicing actually. Okay. It wasn't at a real exam. Okay. So it was when I was practicing to teach IELTS as a student. Okay. So I was actually getting trained. So that's when that happened. If not, you'll be wondering, oh my God, she told us this. No, that didn't happen during a real exam. Okay. So that was actually when I was practicing to train myself as an IELTS trainer. Okay. So should you correct your mistakes? Well, if you want to, you could. We're not saying don't do it, but make sure it doesn't affect your fluency. The best thing is to just ignore your mistakes and keep talking, right? Because if you go back and self-correct, can you remember that in your fluency and coherence, repetition, self-correction is a point that they mark. So if you keep on doing that, that's a problem. So you might want to just ignore it and keep talking. That would be better. Okay? Right. Then the next one, does body language matter? It doesn't, because there's no marking criteria. The examiner is only interested in your language skills and hearing your language skills, right? However, eye contact is a nice body language. So you feel that, you're confident and you show that you're confident as well without just going, well, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about that. What if I teach you like that? Oh yeah, so today we're going to talk about speaking. That doesn't look good. Having that eye contact shows that you're positive, and it's nice to look at a person in the eye and talk, right? So it's okay. But remember, it's not always in all cultures that you should be doing it. I'm talking to you especially in a speaking test. That's it. Okay? Alright, so what should you wear for the speaking test? Well, you could basically wear whatever you're comfortable in. Try to avoid too informal clothes, like, shorts and a t-shirt, but it's basically fine. They don't judge you on your attire, so that's fine. Okay, but try to be a bit professionally dressed, just so that you feel good, but it's not a marking criteria. So I think we've had a look at some common things that would come up into your mind if you were to take the speaking test. And we had a look at the marking criteria mainly, the structure of it, and, some common questions that students ask when they join a class or when they want to do the speaking component, some questions that, pop into their mind and they would want to ask. All right? If you have any other questions, please feel free to put it in the comment box, right? But with that, we come to the end of the lesson, which was an introduction to the IELTS speaking test component.